In a museum conservation laboratory, beneath white gloves and magnifying glass, rests an object that appears, at first, merely eccentric. A Victorian hat, pierced at its front brim by a brass optical tube. It belonged, according to the surviving record, to John William Peepington, an inventor celebrated for seeing around corners and disgraced for caring rather too much about what lay there. His story begins here. John William Peepington was born in Liverpool in 1842 into a family respectable enough to sit still for a portrait. John, at the far right, appears to have regarded stillness as a technicality. His school report of 1851 called him intelligent, but recorded unusual curiosity, repeated unauthorized observation, and insufficient attention to matters placed directly before him. Windows, corridors, playgrounds, and other pupils held greater appeal than whatever lesson occupied his desk. The habit showed promise, though not perhaps of an approved sort. By 14, Peepington's curiosity had acquired a curriculum. In 1856, he was bound for 7 years to Elias Cartwright, a Liverpool optician and mathematical instrument maker, where he learned lenses, prisms, brass tubing, alignment, and the repair of scientific instruments. He next served a Manchester surveyor, studying angles, sightlines, triangulation, and the disciplined business of seeing what could not be approached directly. In 1866 came the final, apparently innocent ingredient. 6 months with a Birmingham haberdasher, learning how a hat might be measured, reinforced, pierced, balanced, and fitted without discomfort. Separately, these were respectable trades. In John Peepington, they formed something more peculiar. Optics, indirect vision, and the front brim of a gentleman's hat, waiting to meet. By May 1867, the 3 respectable trades had met on the pages of Peepington's notebook. The design was no idle sketch. A monocle sat before the right eye. From it, a brass tube rose through the front brim to a rotating prism head above. Light entered at the top, traveled down the tube, turned again, and reached the eye. Mechanically, it was quite sound. Peepington's estimate of its importance was rather larger. In a later self-promotional engraving, he presented the moment as an enlargement of the gentlemanly horizon. Not a novelty, but a civilizing advance. The world, he declared, need no longer be limited to what lay directly ahead. It was a promise. It was also a warning. 12 years passed between Peepington's first complete sketch and the document that made the idea legally his. The surviving record says little about those years. The patent, issued in 1879, says rather more. It names the monocle frame, lower elbow, reinforcing collar, vertical tube, and rotating viewing head with the confidence of established engineering. Its crucial claim is almost anxious in its precision. The tube passes through the front brim only. It enters neither crown nor head. Light is turned at the upper prism, carried downward, turned again, and delivered to the eye. The viewing head may rotate through a full circle, while the wearer remains composed. By the time the seal was applied, an eccentric notebook design had become protected property. 4 years after securing his patent, Peepington did what Victorian invention required before it could become unavoidable. He formed a company. On March 1st, 1883, Peepington Optical Works Limited was incorporated with a registered office in London, manufacturing works in Birmingham, and capital of £50,000. The memorandum is sober until it reaches the company's purpose. It promises periscopic monocles, instruments of oblique vision, and installation by authorized haberdashers throughout Britain, and wherever else opportunity might present itself. Investors were assured of what the document called a rapidly expanding market in discrete vision and periscopic opportunities. An eccentricity now possessed directors, shareholders, a seal, and the legal address. Behind the London address, the Birmingham works performed the less glamorous business of making the thing. Brass tubes were turned true, mirrors silvered, lenses cut, prism heads assembled and tested. The surviving engraving is careful on one point. The hats on the benches were samples for trial alignment only. Peepington's men manufactured the apparatus. They did not fit the customer. That delicate operation was reserved for authorized haberdashers, whose trade already involved measurements too personal and variables too numerous for factory standardization. Expansion also required labor. Recruitment notices sought boys of quiet tread, excellent eyesight, flexible conscience, and no unnecessary attachment to public approval. Apprentices learned polishing, tubing, alignment, secrecy, and the maintenance of a face suggesting absolutely nothing. The company now possessed a works, a workforce, and the method of keeping responsibility elsewhere. The factory supplied an apparatus. The haberdasher made it wearable. Shops wishing to offer the genuine article first required certification, proof of skill, and, according to Peepington, sufficient discretion to be trusted with the front brim of a gentleman's hat. The fitting was exacting. The customer's eyeline was measured. A position was marked in the front brim, an aperture cut, and the felt reinforced above and below with a metal collar. The tube was then secured, balanced, focused, and adjusted until the monocle rested naturally before the right eye without pulling the hat askew. Authorized shops advertised installation, adjustment, and service on the premises. Customers needed only to bring a suitable hat, submit to a series of unusually intimate measurements, and refrain from asking why the fitter required so much information about where they intended to look. This was how Peepington's invention left the factory, one carefully pierced rim at a time.
The patent made the device property, the factory made it available, the haberdashers made it wearable, but the public demonstrations made it social. That is the moment Peepington ceased to be merely an inventor and began to become a public problem. Peepington understood that an apparatus seen in private remained a curiosity. An apparatus demonstrated before a paying crowd became an event. At the Royal Exhibition Hall, visitors were promised forward, rearward, elevated and downward viewing without the least turn of the head. At 11, the wearer faced forward. At 1, he described what stood behind him. At 3, he surveyed the room from above. At 5, he inspected the floor without stooping. The program concluded at 7, with all 4 directions in what the handbill called glorious succession. Authorized haberdashers remained on site to adjust hats, receive orders, and translate applause into measurements. Peepington no longer needed to persuade the public that the device worked. He needed only to persuade them that looking everywhere was a gentleman's right.
Public demonstrations created appetite. The catalogue converted it into orders. By 1884, Peepington Optical Works was circulating an illustrated booklet that promised observation without exertion by post throughout Britain. The standard apparatus could be purchased alone and taken to an authorized haberdasher. Customers unwilling to trust local workmanship could order a complete fitted hat, provided they supplied the circumference of the head, width of the front brim, distance from pupil to felt, usual posture, and whether they intended chiefly to look forward, behind, above, or down. The catalogue offered the civic standard, the railway companion, and the theatre and assembly model, each differing chiefly in finish, tube length, and the confidence with which its owner expected to be forgiven. Accessories included a velvet-lined case, replacement collars, polishing cloths, rain caps, and a discreet brass cover for occasions when universal observation might appear socially excessive. Orders left Birmingham in straw-packed wooden boxes. Each included printed instructions, a fitting voucher, and the warning that the company accepted no responsibility for collisions occurring while the wearer was successfully observing somewhere else. Mail order success produced its own evidence. Letters from satisfied customers selected and printed by the company that sold them the apparatus. A theatre patron praised the ability to follow the stage while monitoring the boxes behind him. A birdwatcher reported improved observation of nesting birds without the inconvenience of facing them. Inspectors, lecturers, and carriage passengers offered similarly grateful accounts. One suspicious husband wrote that domestic confidence had been restored, though he did not say whose. Peepington then turned overseas. An export advertisement recommended the device for colonial climates, presenting local landscapes and people alike as material to be surveyed by the traveling gentleman. The language was imperial, the purpose evasive, and the scientific tone disguised neither. For those still unconvinced, the company supplied laboratory proof. Rival apparatuses, nearly identical to Peepington's own, were declared inferior in clarity, steadiness, and moral intention. The first two claims were doubtful. The third was not measurable. Laboratory proof, however doubtful, gave buyers confidence. By May 1885, the periscopic monocle had left the showroom and entered fashionable society. At grand balls, supper rooms, and private gatherings, gentlemen wearing the apparatus were observed staring solemnly ahead throughout the evening. Only later did they provide remarkably exact accounts of what had occurred behind curtains, beneath tables, in adjoining rooms, and in places where polite attention was not ordinarily directed. A Society Notes column described one gentleman repeating a conversation conducted behind the arras, another identifying the contents of supper plates before they were removed, and the third reporting a misplaced fan beneath a distant table. None had visibly turned his head. The achievement was treated as both scientific marvel and social accomplishment. To appear indifferent while observing everything became a new form of masculine composure. On promenades and in public parks, however, the craze was harder to disguise. Satirical artists showed respectable gentlemen bending, craning, and arranging themselves around women who had never requested examination. Even sympathetic newspapers struggled to decide whether this was optical inquiry, fashionable novelty, or ordinary impertinence. Peepington called it observation without exposure. Society was beginning to understand that the exposure belonged to everyone else.
The remarkable thing is not that gentlemen misused the device. It is that they wrote rules for misusing it respectably. The Periscopic Gentlemen's Club treated impropriety as a problem of manners. A member was not to confess what he had seen, compare notes in front of women, swivel the apparatus too eagerly, or admit to any motive less elevated than architectural appreciation. If challenged, he was to withdraw with injured dignity. The rules did not protect the observed. They protected the observer's reputation. The private circular, dated the 1st of April 1887, announced 7 rules beneath 2 mottos. We see much, we speak not, we are innocent, reduced morality to silence. Discretion is the true field glass of the soul, made secrecy sound like character. The member must reveal nothing, compare no notes near wives or female relatives, describe the instrument as an aid to architectural appreciation, and preserve an expression of innocence even while perceiving far more than was seemly. Sudden movement marked the novice. Confrontation required injured virtue and a dignified retreat. A companion guide translated the code into posture. Proper bearing meant upright calm. The failures were more revealing. Vulgar craning, undignified crouching, collision with a lamppost, suspicious interest near staircases, and indiscriminate swivelling at the theatre. The club had not solved the moral problem. It had divided it into acceptable and unacceptable manners of looking. Once discretion could be standardized, the apparatus itself was ready to be copied.
The first organized opposition did not come from opticians, magistrates, or rival manufacturers. It came from the women expected to endure the instrument in public. A handbill issued by the Committee of Ladies for Public Decency and Protection named the offence, without euphemism, mechanical ogling. A lady's privacy is not a public spectacle, it declared. The committee demanded that periscopic devices be prohibited in theatres, railway stations, public gardens and promenades, that notices be posted and that attendants be empowered to exclude their wearers. Its most important argument was also its simplest. The women did not ask to disappear. They asked that looking cease to be concealed, unilateral, and exempt from objection. We asked not for concealment, but for civility. Commerce responded more quickly than law. Defensive dress promised reflective parasols, decoy trimming, confounding patterns, layered overskirts, reinforced hems, and strategic flounces. Protection from intrusive observation was converted into another expense to be borne by the observed. The newspapers preferred spectacle. One cartoon showed Peepington surrounded by women, police, judges, and the legitimate hat trade, as though the entire city had finally discovered where to direct its attention. The protest had changed the terms of the argument. The question was no longer whether Peepington's instrument worked. It was whether anyone had the right to use it without the knowledge or consent of the person being watched. The campaign did not end with a handbill. Once the complaint had been named, the city began to write it into its walls. Hotels prohibited optical instruments through transoms, keyholes, ventilation shafts, grills, chimney openings, and any other aperture curiosity might mistake for architecture. Restaurants warned gentlemen that anyone inspecting neighboring diners would be seated facing a blank wall and charged 25 cents for the privilege. Railway companies banned concealed viewing tubes from stations and grounds. Theatres posted prohibitions at their entrances. Parks and promenades asked visitors to look where they were walking. Attendants were left to decide whether a hat appeared more observant than its owner. Each institution described the same conduct differently. Hotels called it indecorous. Railway managers called it trespass. Restaurateurs treated it as a surcharge. Theatres treated it as grounds for removal. The city had not agreed on the offence, but had become remarkably specific about where it could not occur. The medical profession supplied diagnoses. Periscopic eye was the inability to pass a shop window without oblique examination. Rotational curiosity afflicted men unable to hear a footstep without turning. Chronic rearward attention produced the conviction that whatever lay behind must be more important than whatever stood before. The cures included blank walls, supervised forward walking, cold compresses, modest reading, and abstinence from theatres, galleries, staircases, and fashionable dress. The periscopic monocle had done more than change how men looked. It had forced hotels, restaurants, railways, parks, and theatres to explain, in writing, where looking was no longer permitted. The city had learned to look back.
A proper apology tells us who acted, what they did, and who was harmed. Peepington's statement does almost the exact reverse. The actor disappears. The offence becomes discomfort, and the injured party is invited to consider whether she may simply have interpreted the instrument unfortunately. It is not an admission of wrongdoing. It is an attempt to separate the reputation of the inventor from the predictable use of the invention.
Peepington nevertheless promised reforms. Future instruments would include a small brass restraint limiting the rotation of the upper viewing head in places of worship, respectable dining rooms, and the presence of elderly relatives. A revised instruction card advised gentlemen that the apparatus should not be directed into private boxes, railway compartments, upstairs windows, bathing facilities, or toward any person already expressing objection. The company also announced that employees would receive additional training in the distinction between observation and scrutiny. No instruments were withdrawn. No customers were asked to return them. And the apology was distributed not only to newspapers, but to investors, retailers, club secretaries, and every institution known to have prohibited the device. Peepington had discovered a particularly durable form of public contrition: regret for the reaction, confidence in the product, and a promise that future impropriety would be conducted under clearer instructions. The apology did not end the controversy. It merely gave the controversy something official to quote.
The rivals did not improve the principle. They improved the price, the advertising, and the spelling. Mechanically, the distinctions were modest. Peepington offered a cheaper version and insisted that similarity of name was merely convenient. Peepington advertised a lateral observation tube, a self-adjusting joint, and respectable compatibility with nearly every hat. Both firms claimed originality. Both described the other firms as imitators. What they had copied most successfully was Peepington's promise that curiosity could be made discreet. Peepington entered the market with the simplest possible argument: just as good at half the price. Its advertisement promised a complete outfit for $2.50, fitted to tall hats, bowlers, soft hats, and boaters. It also warned customers not to be deceived by high prices or fancy names. Peepington answered with a lateral observation tube, said to pass through the brim rather than the crown. It offered a self-adjusting joint, polished nickel, tempered steel, and the assurance that no one need ever be the wiser. Its guarantee was positive, unconditional, and carefully silent on the question of taste. Peepington's reply was not technical, it was moral. A public notice called Peepington an inferior imitation and Peepington an abomination. Cheap materials, clouded optics, unreliable mechanisms, and vulgar purposes were blamed for every misuse that had begun to embarrass the original invention. By 1891, the quarrel had reached court. Peepington sued Peepington and Peepington for copying the mechanism, corrupting the public mind, and reducing optical respectability to a problem of spelling. The witnesses were less helpful. A lady objected to being examined. A policeman admitted that the devices were difficult to distinguish. An optician found them mechanically similar. A newsboy revealed that 6 Peepingtons could be purchased for the price of 2 bottles and a moist bun. The case was presented as a defense of invention. It looked increasingly like a dispute over who had the right to sell the same bad idea with the greatest dignity.
On the evening of November 17, 1884, the Royal Alhambra received its patrons beneath gaslight, with every expectation of respectable amusement. During the performance, however, several ladies in the dress circle noticed a gentleman who appeared to be facing the stage, while the upper head of his periscopic monocle was directed elsewhere. The gentleman was John William Peepington. When challenged, Peepington insisted that he had been examining the scenery, the arrangement of the private boxes, and the theatre's sightlines entirely for technical purposes. The ladies were not persuaded. Neither was the manager. Complaints spread through the auditorium. An usher was summoned, and constables were called to the theatre. Peepington continued to explain the optical distinction between looking at a person and merely directing an instrument toward her. The distinction did not survive official inspection. He was apprehended, taken from the Alhambra, and later released on bail. By morning, the incident had acquired a headline. The periscopic monocle was no longer merely ridiculous, it was now evidence.
Once a search warrant entered Peepington's premises, his difficulty ceased to be merely social. Victorian police procedure was wonderfully literal. Officers catalogued not intentions but objects: hats, tubes, lenses, ledgers, drawings, and correspondence. A workshop could therefore become an argument laid out upon a table. Peepington might insist that each component was perfectly innocent. Unfortunately, when assembled in the correct order, they formed a considerably less innocent proposition. The important discovery was not a secret machine. It was paperwork showing that the machine was neither accidental nor misunderstood. Once Peepington passed from complaint to apprehension, the matter ceased to be technical and became spectacular. Ladies who had previously objected in private now identified him in public. Constables required no philosophical guidance after that. They took hold of the gentleman and, just as importantly, of the nefarious hat. The seizure of the apparatus was symbolically devastating. A man may defend an invention. It is far harder to defend oneself while one's instrument is being carried away as evidence of impropriety. Thus, celebrity gave place to humiliation. Peepington, once advertised as a marvel of discreet observation, now circulated through London as something far less dignified, a public example of shame and scandal.
By the opening of the proceedings, Bow Street had become less a court than a public amphitheatre of embarrassment. Reporters, curious spectators, and women who had come to give evidence crowded the entrances, all eager to witness the extraordinary inventor explain what by now seemed impossible to explain. Inside, the newspapers faithfully recorded every exchange. Peepington did not deny the mechanism. He denied only the interpretation placed upon it. The periscopic monocle, he insisted, merely expanded the natural field of gentlemanly awareness, including all forms natural and shapely. And any unfortunate observations were entirely incidental to legitimate scientific inquiry. The court then examined the apparatus itself. Resting upon the evidence table was the now infamous hat, its reinforced brim, brass tube, rotating viewing head, and monocle displayed for careful inspection. What had once been advertised as a marvel of respectable engineering had become Exhibit Number 7. Throughout his testimony, Peepington spoke at great length of optics, mechanical innovation, commercial custom, and misunderstood intention. The magistrate listened with visible patience worn thin, while the women whose complaints had brought the case before the court appeared rather less interested in theoretical discussions of gentlemanly awareness. By the close of the day's proceedings, the trial had ceased to concern a curious invention alone. It had become a far broader question: whether technical ingenuity and elaborate language could excuse conduct that everyone in the courtroom plainly understood as perverted peeping. The court, having endured Mr. Peepington's explanations of optics, posture, perspective, and gentlemanly awareness, found itself unmoved by the vocabulary. In February 1885, John William Peepington was convicted. The manufacture, sale, possession, and public use of the periscopic monocle were thereafter declared unlawful, not because the instrument lacked ingenuity, but because ingenuity had been placed in the service of conduct no respectable society could pretend not to understand. The advertisements disappeared from haberdashers' windows. Authorized agents became suddenly less authorized. Gentlemen who had lately praised the apparatus as a triumph of observation now discovered a passionate affection for looking straight ahead. Peepington was sentenced to 6 years' penal servitude. The court had no need to settle the finer questions of optical philosophy. It was sufficient to determine that a man who insisted upon seeing where he ought not look should, for a time, be placed where there was very little to see.
Within the prison, Peepington's punishment acquired an unintended efficiency. Placed in a corridor narrow enough to defeat ambition, he began reporting irregularities no ordinary eye could claim to have witnessed. The warders called him the Corridor Inspector. The title was not official. Prison, it must be said, did not extinguish Peepington's profession. It merely reduced its materials. From broken spectacles, bottle glass, buttons, tin, wire, thread, and the more ambitious portions of cardboard, he assembled instruments of disgraceful practicality. Warders discovered that the Corridor Inspector was not a nickname born of charm, but an administrative response to repeated optical trespass. Each confiscation was entered solemnly. Each entry improved the evidence against him. By the spring of 1887, Eleanor Peepington could no longer persuade herself that her husband's conduct had been merely eccentric. The testimony, the notebooks, and the endless humiliation had stripped even charity of its footing. Their savings were exhausted. Creditors had become permanent visitors. Patent papers arrived like constant insults. In a letter to her friend Charlotte, Eleanor confessed what dignity now required. She could not defend her husband and his optical perversions, and she had begun to consider a difficult task for a woman of that era: a legal separation. By 1890, Peepington was freed from incarceration, but his marriage was lost. Eleanor's divorce settlement brought her little comfort, for much of it consisted in patents, renewals, and speculative rights she regarded as costly humiliations rather than property. Even then, John William Peepington continued to press, with undiminished confidence, that the foreign rights to his inventions must not be permitted to lapse. Thus, the marriage ended, not in tenderness, but beneath a paper avalanche of unwanted and shameful inventions. By then, everything had to go. Eleanor Peepington's household did not so much recover as submit to inventory. Parlor furniture, workshop tools, optical instruments, and 12 suspicious hats were advertised with a briskness that made grief sound like good bookkeeping. What remained of Peepington Optical Works followed in 1891. Brass tubing, lenses, hat forms, unfinished apparatus, printing plates, and business remnants passed beneath the auctioneer's heavy hammer. The reputation went with them, though there were fewer bids. 11 years after the desperate auction notices, Eleanor Peepington's inheritance performed the singular act her husband never had. It finally became respectable and prosperous. On the 29th of May, 1901, the patents once received as a humiliating and scornful settlement were sold to Harbury, Wainwright & Company, telescope makers to observatories, maritime firms, and scientific institutions, for the extraordinary sum of £250,000, a shockingly huge sum equal to nearly £40 million in today's economy. The scornful public, having once laughed mockingly at Mrs. Peepington's mournful burden, now discovered it had been a serendipitous fortune. John William Peepington, naturally, was not at all present to enjoy the financial correction. By the summer of 1901, Eleanor Peepington had acquired what society is pleased to call comfortable security. John William Peepington had acquired no such improvement. He was destitute, penniless, and only had his bad name and once brilliant mind to accompany him. His name appears thereafter only by accident. in notices of charity, in inquiries after unpaid accounts, and in recollections no one was eager to own. One report placed a much reduced gentleman, believed by a single observer to be Peepington, among the applicants at a London soup room, looking rather dishevelled and forlorn. There was no confirmation or redemption. There was no triumphant return of a once great man. There was only a cue, a bowl, a dirty spoon, and the gradual mercy of being wholly forgotten by anyone and everyone. After the soup line sighting, Peepington the man recedes from visible existence almost entirely. What remained was more durable and less liable to be arrested: the apparatus he invented. A 1902 clipping in the Peepington archive went so far as to connect the disgraced principal with submarine optics and inventor Simon Lake. A protected eye, a bent path of sight, and a viewer spared the indignity of standing where the view occurred. Stripped of its owner's habits, the mechanism began to sound less like scandal and more like engineering. Thus, Peepington's idea survived by doing what Peepington himself could not. It behaved politely in society. Culture first made Peepington a warning. Children were instructed with admirable severity that curiosity was not a virtue when assisted by brass tubing. The lesson was plain. A boy might ask questions, but a gentleman ought not construct an apparatus for answering them through other people's windows. The parlour soon improved upon the sermon. Peepington's downfall became a family game, with moral peril converted into dice, counters, and cheerful disgrace. The players advanced past improper observation, judicial embarrassment, and confiscated headwear, all in the name of wholesome instruction.
What one sees in the Peepington afterlife isn't forgiveness. It's merchandising wearing the hat of moral instruction.
In the silent comedies of the 1920s, Peepington ceased to be a warning and became a body in motion, pursued by constables, misunderstood by ladies, and defeated repeatedly by the machinery of his own curiosity. Peepington's last look, or the apparatus, betrays him again. By the time the film was reissued, the joke had swollen beyond the scandal. The audience no longer needed the details of the trial. It needed only the hat, the chase, the woman's indignation, and the certainty that the guilty man would trip before the final reel. At the colleges, the periscopic monocle returned still further reduced, not as an invention, nor even as a scandal, but as a lark. Young men wore it because their grandfathers had disapproved of it, which is often the shortest path to fashion. Thus, Peepington passed from moral example to parlour amusement, from cinema farce to campus joke, and finally into that most forgiving of institutions, the collectible oddity. Respectability had not returned. Entertainment had arrived in its place. By mid-century, even the joke had been reduced. The periscopic monocle, once an object of patents, trials, prison ledgers, and domestic ruin, returned as a novelty of cardboard, cellophane, elastic, and hope poorly rewarded. No child actually expected to see around corners. In fact, the apparatus scarcely assisted with seeing forward. The hat followed. So did the mask. Peepington was no longer a man, nor even a scandal. He had become something worse, an affordable amusement. At last, long after usefulness had departed and embarrassment had softened into folklore, Peepington received the safest form of honour available to a difficult man: posthumous recognition. The articles were careful. They praised the invention, not the inventor, and admired the principle, not the conduct. Peepington had not been forgiven exactly, but he had become historical, which is sometimes close enough. Once Peepington became historical, museums could approach him without embarrassment. The contrivance was placed behind glass, assigned a number, and described in careful language. There were no allegations now, only provenance. No scandal, only context. Only an unusual example of late Victorian optical domestic culture. In this way, the museum performed its quiet miracle. It did not forgive Peepington, it dusted him. By the late 20th century, Peepington had been reduced, refined, and at last sweetened for public consumption. The Peep Bar, that most peculiarly British confection, offered layers of chocolate, caramel, crunch, and eel-flavoured luxury, all arranged in the noble likeness of a periscope. It was no longer a scandal. It was a delightful bit of delicacy. In time, Peepington ceased to be merely a name. He became a verb, a warning, and eventually an entry of doubtful scholarship. To Peepington was to take an excessive interest in matters just outside one's proper field of view. The man was gone, the implication remained. Having once been condemned for looking where he ought not, Peepington now entered the strange mercy of imitation. He became costume, gesture, character, and pose. On stages and convention floors, the old impropriety was no longer evidence. It was wardrobe. Even waxworks, with their usual confidence, preserved him as though history itself had requested a photograph. And at the midway, Peepington reached his most democratic form. Painted plywood, blinking bulbs, and a ticket booth, promising wonder in exchange for exact change. He had not returned to respectability. Respectability had been dressed as him. The stage, having survived many indignities, eventually discovered Peepington. There he was at last, not a cautionary tale, not a legal matter, but a musical opportunity.
I only want to see, I only want to know what's waiting just beyond the light.
The notices were swift. Only 24 theatregoers attended the debut, and several had apparently expected an entirely different kind of show. A peep show. By intermission, confusion had spread through the house with unusual efficiency. By evening's end, the audience departed with the stunned politeness common to both theatre and minor injury. Peepington had reached Broadway. Broadway, in fairness, did not keep him long. By the present age, Peepington had passed beyond scandal, beyond pity, and even beyond satire, becoming instead the sort of figure one might purchase beside a cash register or assemble from a small bag of coloured bricks. His likeness, once sufficient to disturb a magistrate, was now reduced to collectible form. A toy with a vacant smile, a miniature gentleman in a hat, and a simplified contrivance fit for the nursery shelf or the enthusiast's cabinet. Thus was the man, at last, made harmless. His inquisitiveness survived, but only in moulded plastic, retail packaging, and the agreeable nonsense of the collector's market. By the present age, Peepington had passed beyond scandal, beyond pity, and even beyond satire, becoming instead the sort of figure one might purchase beside a cash register or assemble from a small bag of coloured bricks. His likeness, once sufficient to disturb a magistrate, was now reduced to collectible form. A toy with a vacant smile, a miniature gentleman in a hat, and a simplified contrivance fit for the nursery shelf or the enthusiast's cabinet. Thus was the man, at last, made harmless. His inquisitiveness survived, but only in moulded plastic, retail packaging, and the agreeable nonsense of the collector's market. Public television followed, as public television must. With careful lighting and period typography, even Peepington could be made to resemble a problem worth understanding. The scandal had not vanished. It had acquired proper funding and presented a renewed understanding of the man.
They don't understand. I just want to see everything.
Peepington next entered the interactive age, where even disgrace could be granted a start button. First, he became Pixels, a tiny hat, a tiny monocle, and an unusually judgmental walking cycle. Later versions offered improved lighting, richer textures, and the same essential question: why is that man looking over there? At last, Peepington could be controlled directly, which was more than could ever be said in life. Yet the idea itself continued its strange migration away from disgrace. In assistive design, protected viewing, helmeted environments, and remote observation, the old dream of seeing from somewhere the eye could not conveniently go became useful without being indecent. The mechanism was refined, the language was improved, the eyebrows were, at last, lowered. By the time the principal reached the language of space, Peepington's name had nearly been polished clean. At last, Peepington's story appears to have arrived at its proper ending. Invention redeemed, scandal contained, and the heavens, at last, safely observed. Our final report comes from Mizukage-mura, an obscure town in Japan where a pale, Victorian, ghostly gentleman is said to favor second-floor windows. He does not knock, he peeps.
Attend, good friends of polished mind, to Peepington's career. A gentleman of curious eye and instruments severe, he peered where others dared not peer, round corners, hats and doors, and called it noble science while alarming several flaws. Oh, Peepington, Peepington, optical man of note, with brass about thy hatband and suspicion in thy coat, we followed thee through shame and fog, through ledger, trial and smoke, and now, dear public, softly mark, it was, in fact, a joke. He courted praise in parlor halls with lenses finely ground, till matrons found his field of view imprudently profound. The clubs grew cold, the papers warmed, the magistrates drew near, and what he named invention they pronounced extremely queer. To prison then our hero went, with dignity reduced, where bottle glass and buttons were regrettably reused. The warders wrote in careful hand of contraband and thread, for still he watched the corridor from underneath his bed. Oh, Peepington, Peepington, disputed man of sight, who turned the act of looking into legal dynamite. We sang of thee with solemn face, with scholarship bespoke, and lest there be uncertainty, it was entirely a joke. Poor Eleanor of wounded name endured the public sneer, the creditors, the patent bills, the whisperings severe. She took, in settlement of grief, those papers none would praise, and boxed away the instruments of Peepingtonian days. Yet fortune late but powdered well arrived in formal dress. The patents once despised became a scientific press. £250,000 changed shame to household ease, while Peepington regrettably was absent from the fees. Oh, mark how reputation works, that solemn powdered fraud. It buries men with one gloved hand and crowns them with the odd. A scandal may, with varnish laid, become a noble spark, provided no one looks too close while standing in the dark. Then came the years of afterthought, of lectures, plays, and fame, of experts with invented posts pronouncing on his name. The stage adored his wretched hat, the scholars stroked their chins, and rockets bore his principles to more celestial sins. And now the final notice comes from far across the sea, where Mizukage-mura reports a mild impropriety. At dusk beside a second floor, a figure pale is known, with Victorian hat and optical tube, still peering on alone. Oh, Peepington, Peepington, most observant shade, still practicing thy vanished art in spectral promenade. We gave thee trials, grief and fame, a wife, a hat to smoke. We gave thee Nass at Broadway too, and yes, it was a joke. So close the book and strike the lamps, let every pundit bow. Their chairs, degrees and learned remarks are quite invented now. Yet should you feel at window height a presence near the pane, do not accuse the documentary, blame Peepington again.
Should you have believed even a syllable of this nonsensical, extravagant rubbish, I urge you, with deepest civic concern, to consult a qualified physician of the head at once.
There must be more than what is placed politely before my eyes, more than the room, more than the wall, more than the ordered skies. The world is always hiding things, it whispers, then withdraws, and every curtain seems to be a question without pause. They tell me leave the hidden things, some doors should remain closed. But how can I abandon a truth that's half exposed? A crack beneath the doorway, a movement through the glass, a moment that may disappear unless I watch it pass. I only want to see, I only want to know what's waiting just beyond the light, where I'm not meant to go. One small revelation, one truth the shadows show. I only want to see, I only want to know. I only want to know. Perhaps they'll laugh, perhaps they'll say I've lost myself somehow. But every great discovery was once forbidden ground, and perhaps one day they'll speak my name with wonder, not disdain. Perhaps the thing they call absurd will make the darkness plain. They tell me leave the hidden things, some doors should remain closed. But how can I abandon a truth that's half exposed? A crack beneath the doorway, a movement through the glass, a moment that may disappear unless I watch it pass. I only want to see, I only want to know what's waiting just beyond the light, where I'm not meant to go. One small revelation, one truth the shadows show. I only want to see, I only want to know. I only want to know. Maybe truth is patient, maybe it waits for me behind the seam of silence, behind the locked up key. If I have to tremble, if I have to burn, I'd rather face the not yet known than never learn. I only want to see, I only want to know what's waiting just beyond the light, where I'm not meant to go. One small revelation, then I will let it go. I only want to see, to go. I only want to see. I only want to know.
The documentary is finished. You may stop watching now. There is no further revelation, no hidden epilogue, no additional insight into the wretched business of the hat. You are quite free to go. Indeed, I would encourage it. Still here, are you? Very well. Perhaps you imagine there is some final morsel of truth waiting in the darkness, some secret confession, some last delicious aperture through which the whole affair may be newly understood. There is not. There is only blackness, silence, and your frankly troubling refusal to move on. I must say, this is beginning to feel less like appreciation and more like loitering. The film is over. The credits have rolled. The music has ceased. Even Peepington, a man of famously poor boundaries, would have had the decency to leave by now. Go on then. Off you pop. No? Good Lord. You sat through all of that, believe God knows how much of it, and now you're waiting for the screen itself to reward you for your persistence? Madam, sir, or whatever form of indoor shrubbery you may be, I implore you, close the window. Stand up, hydrate, rejoin society. This is not a bonus scene. This is a cry for help. Stop watching. Stop it at once. I can see why Peepington looked elsewhere. Anywhere would be preferable to this.